Let's just take you back to the United States and the aftermath of that shooting, in which two children aged 8 and 10 have been killed, 17 others injured after a school shooting in Minneapolis. This is the scene. They were expecting a news conference from the authorities there, including law enforcement, and they're just coming to the microphone, we think. The attack happened during the morning mass at the Annunciation Catholic school. The suspect was armed with a rifle, shotgun and pistol and shot through the church windows and then died himself from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
A news conference that no one wants to be at. A community behind us, Annunciation Church and School, committed to academics, service and Catholic values, filled with the first days of school of beautiful children going to learn those values, share with their teachers and their classmates. And instead of that joy and that curiosity and that learning, they were met with evil and horror and death. And we often come to these and say, these unspeakable tragedies, or there's no words for this. There shouldn't be words for these types of incidents because they should not happen. And there's no words that are going to ease the pain of the families today. On behalf of all the people of Minnesota, our deepest sympathies. A wish that any of these words would make what you're feeling now better, but it won't. A place that's founded on community, founded on service, founded on family. I'd like to give special thank you to the mayor and the team in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis Police Department, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, Minnesota State Patrol, the BCA, so many agencies, our federal partners in the FBI, the first responders, and the heroic work that's happening now as we speak at multiple medical locations, including Hennepin County Medical Center, where most of our children were transported to receive the life-saving care. The thoughts and prayers and the hopes and the support that we need to give them in this moment, too, is critical. Speaking with all the people here and grateful to our federal partners, Senator Klobuchar speaking early this morning and receiving a call from President Trump, who was with his leadership team of the Attorney General and the Vice President, expressing their deep condolences amongst the horror that happened and an offer to provide the support to the folks here in Minnesota of what's needed. So there's a lot of cameras here, and unfortunately we have been through these types of things. They will be gone at some point. All of you, you have to do your jobs. But what happened here today will not be gone. Minnesotans will not step away. We'll stand with this community. We'll redouble ourselves to do the best we can to understand what we can do to prevent any parent from having to receive the calls they received today, from any school dedicated to children having to respond to a situation that, as we said, is unthinkable, but that's all too common, not just in Minnesota, but across this country. It's Minnesota's day today, and it's my strongest desire that no state, no community, no school ever experiences a day like this. So I ask the rest of the folks around the country who are watching, keep us in your thoughts and prayers, but also keep us in the thoughts for action. Keep us in the ideas that we can work together. And it's on these days like this, I think, and I hope we can hold on to it. We are unified as a community. Everybody across the country today is part of the Annunciation Parish, and they're with those families. With that, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey.
Thank you, Governor. Throughout the morning, we have seen this extraordinary Minneapolis family step up in thousands of different ways. People with strength, resilience, compassion, and love for the families that have been forever impacted by this heinous act. We want to make sure that we're doing everything possible for them right now, and I want to give a special thank you, and we are so grateful to all of the faculty and the teachers at Annunciation. The way that they acted during severe threat and danger was nothing short of heroic. This is a tragic and horrible event that should never occur, and it would have been all the more tragic and horrible had they not stepped in, at times perhaps put themselves in danger to protect others. As horrible as this has been, it could have been far worse. I'm grateful for our law enforcement partners, our police officers in the Minneapolis Police Department and other law enforcement agencies well beyond that step up, that answered the call to make sure that they were running towards danger when so many of the rest of us would have run in the other direction. Thank you. We are so appreciative of your service. To Principal DeBoer and your whole team, the ethic that you have showed, the love that you've shown, it's flat out incredible. And at the same time, look, we need to be doing more than talking. It can't just be words. There needs to be action. And when we have seen school shooting after school shooting, when we have seen churches get shot up by horrible actors, I think the impetus has to be on all of us as leaders to do a whole lot more, to recognize that we've got more guns in this country than we have people. And it's on all of us to recognize the truth and the reality that we can't just say that this shouldn't happen again and then allow it to happen again and again beyond that. It's on all of us. And I have heard about a whole lot of hate that's being directed at our trans community. Anybody who is using this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any other community out there has lost their sense of common humanity. We should not be operating out of a place of hate for anyone. We should be operating from a place of love for our kids. Kids died today. This needs to be about them. This needs to be wrapping our arms around these families with every bit of love that we can possibly show. And I know that our Minneapolis family and well beyond is prepared to do exactly that. And so my message to everyone out there is, again, these families are experiencing some acute pain right now. But don't just think of these as somebody else's kids. Think of your own. Let's make sure that we're acting now to not just say it's never happening again, but ensure it doesn't. Our chief of police, who's been working tirelessly throughout the day, along with, again, a number of different law enforcement agencies, investigators, federal parts. Thank you, Senator Klobuchar, for being here. Been working tirelessly, and I'd like to invite him up to give some more of the details that have come up. Chief.
My name is Brian O'Hara, B-R-I-A-N, O''H-A-R-A. I am the Minneapolis Police Chief. Good afternoon, and thank you all for your patience as we continue to gather the facts in this investigation into this truly unthinkable tragedy that happened here earlier today. I want to make sure that we are providing the most accurate information possible, particularly as we speak around our victims. At this point, we know we have a total of 19 victims from this tragedy. 2 were young children, ages 8 and 10, that were sitting in the pews at Mass when they were shot and killed. They were pronounced deceased on the scene. There were another 14 children between the ages of 6 and 15 that were injured by gunfire. There were also 3 adults in their 80s that were parishioners here attending Mass that were also shot in this incident. The families of all of the children that have been affected have been notified. The coward that shot these victims took his own life in the rear of the church. That coward has been identified as 23-year-old Rubin Westman. No prior criminal history. As to the weapons used to perpetrate this horrific attack, there was a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol. All three had been lawfully purchased by the shooter. At this stage, we believe that the shooter had acted alone. There is no indication of other suspects directly involved in carrying out this attack. Our investigators are working with other agencies in the process of executing 4 search warrants. One is for the church itself, where this crime occurred. The other 3 are residences nearby in the metro that are related to this shooter. Additional firearms are being recovered from those 3 residential locations as we speak. We are also aware of a manifesto that the shooter had timed to be released on YouTube. This manifesto appeared to show him at the scene and included some disturbing writings. That content has since been taken down with the assistance of the FBI, and it now remains under active review by our investigators. We know this community is reeling and is in pain. I want to ensure everyone in our community, this parish, all of the families affected, and all of our residents, that all of law enforcement collectively, local law enforcement, our county, our state, and all of our federal law enforcement partners have been here, and we are all working tirelessly to uncover the full scope of what happened, to try and identify a motive why it happened, and whether there are any other further details. We will continue to share updates as the investigation progresses, and we remain committed to being as transparent as possible while protecting the integrity of this investigation. In a moment, I will take some questions that I am able to answer, but first I want to bring up the principal of Annunciation School, Matt Du Bois, as well as, after him, the Archbishop, our Archbishop Bernard Hebda. So, Principal.
Good afternoon, everyone. To any of our students and families and staff watching right now, I love you. You're so brave, and I'm so sorry this happened to us today. Within seconds of this situation beginning, our teachers were heroes. Children were ducked down. Adults were protecting children. Older children were protecting younger children. As we heard earlier, it could have been significantly worse without their heroic action. This is a nightmare, but we call our staff the Dream Team, and we will recover from this. We will rebuild from this. When we planned for this school year, we intentionally chose a theme from the prophet Jeremiah chapter 29, a future filled with hope. There's nothing about today that can fill us with hope. We, as a community, have a responsibility to make sure that no child, no parent, no teacher ever has to experience what we've experienced today, ever again. I need everybody to commit those words to your speech patterns, never again. We lost 2 angels today. And please continue to pray for those still receiving care. We can't change the past, but we can do something about the future. There's an African proverb that says, when you pray, move your feet. So I beg you, I ask you to please pray, but don't stop with your words. Let's make a difference and support this community, these children, these families, these teachers. Never again can we let this happen. I love you, Annunciation family. We're with you, and we will be stronger when this is done. Archbishop Hebda will be coming next.
Thank you, Principal Du Bois. I'm so grateful that Mayor Fry and the Chief both mentioned how valiant you and your staff were. I'm so grateful to the pastor here at Annunciation, Father Dennis Zarin, for the deacon, Deacon Kevin Keneally, also were heroic in this time. But how sad it is, for sure, not only for the families who are directly involved, but indeed for families everywhere who feel the threat that comes from an event, a tragedy like today's. I would never want to correct a principal, but Principal DeBoer said it wasn't so clear where would be the source of hope. And brothers and sisters, we have to be men and women of hope. Already today, I've been receiving messages from all over our country promising prayers. And I think it's the prayers of the feet as well, Principal. That is, for me, is a source of hope, just as we see families stepping forward to help those who have been impacted by this terrible tragedy. Very grateful that Principal DeBoer spoke about prayer. Certainly that the bell in a Catholic church is always a call to prayer. And so it's a reminder for us, for sure, to be praying. And we have to recognize that it's through prayer and through that prayer of the feet, through that action, that we can indeed make a difference. That has to be the source of our hope. I was particularly pleased today to receive a message from Pope Leo. If you'd bear with me, I'd like to share that with you. It comes directly from Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who's the Secretary of State, and it reads like this. His Holiness Pope Leo XIV was profoundly saddened to learn of the loss of life and injuries following the shooting that took place at Annunciation Church in Minneapolis. And he sends his heartfelt condolences and the assurance of spiritual closeness to all those affected by this terrible tragedy, especially the families now grieving the loss of a child, while commending the souls of the deceased children to the love of Almighty God. His Holiness prays for the wounded as well as the first responders, medical personnel, and clergy who are caring for them and their loved ones. At this extremely difficult time, the Holy Father imparts to the Annunciation Catholic School community, the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis, and the people of the greater Twin Cities metropolitan area, his apostolic blessing as a pledge of peace, fortitude, and consolation in the Lord Jesus. My brothers and sisters, that gives me some hope. We know that the Holy Father, Pope Leo, did his hospital training right here in Minneapolis, so he knows our community, and he's been reminding anybody visiting from Minnesota that he spent some time here. We're very grateful for his blessing, but I, like those who have spoken before, ask that you would continue to look for those ways of supporting those who have been impacted today, not only with your prayers, but also with your action. Thank you.
We've been in this place before here in the US. You're watching The Context USA with Ben in London there and myself, Katrina Perry, here in Washington, D.C. We're going to be talking about much of the goings-on here in the US today, but we're going to stick with this story in Minneapolis for the moment. Our panel today, Antonia Ferrier, she's former staff director for Senate Republican Comms and former senior strategist for Mitch McConnell, and Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama and author of the Briefing Book newsletter on Substack. Thanks to you both for being with us. Just want to start with some of what we heard at that press conference there. Antonia, the principal of the Assumption Catholic School there, saying he wanted everyone to commit to the words, never again would we be talking about children being killed, gun violence in places of worship as well. When can we say those words? When will we be able to say those words in the US?
I don't know. It's a very good question. I'm a Catholic. I'm sorry. I'm very sad. It's very heartbreaking to see an entire community and a church targeted. The message of Christ is one of love, and to have children attacked so brutally, it's an act of hate. And I don't know what the motives are, but I'm sure the Lord will judge him. I don't know. I think we frankly have a crisis of violence and hate in the United States that is much bigger than a question of gun violence, than just guns. I think we really have to have a broader national conversation about where we are as a country. Churches, synagogues, places of worship are supposed to be places where you put political division aside, and the Gospels of Christ are, as I said before, of love. I think it's a time for us all to have individual self-reflection, however it is one worships, to try and understand how a person could be so evil. And that was an act of hate, unspeakable evil and hate. I don't know, but we have to continue to have this horrible conversation that has been going on in this country for far too long. It must end.
Joel, I heard a child who had survived the shooting being interviewed on one of the local TV channels in Minneapolis earlier, and he said they practiced for active shooter events, as they're called here in the US, in their classroom, but they'd never practiced for one in a church, and they didn't know what to do. Those words from a child are just astonishing to hear.
You know, Katrina is a father, someone who I dropped off 2 of my girls to school today. They're the kinds of words that leave you speechless, as in a way I feel I am right now. And you know, Antonia's emotion and her points about a church being attacked. This brings up memories for me of my hometown synagogue, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where we suffered the mass murder, where a racist, anti-Semitic man came in and killed 11 people in the synagogue. And since that time, synagogues have beefed up security, hardened security, trained people on what to do if a shooter comes in. But that's no way to live. That's no way to pray. That's no way to be an American. And I think to this question of doing something about it, that proverb, the African proverb that the school leader referred to, which is to pray by moving your feet, essentially, to do something. That's on all of us right now. Our children expect more. They deserve better. They should not have to wonder what to do when they're in a house of worship.
Antonia, can I just ask you, because this happens in other countries, but it seems to happen in the United States with alarming regularity. You talked about not only issues of gun control, but a crisis of hate in the United States. I mean, tell us more about what you mean by that and how America can deal with that crisis of hate.
I don't think there's a centralized approach to that, but I frankly think that the political dialogue, the online dialogue, we are just seeing such a mass fragmentation and so much nasty language and behavior that has just been normalized. And the thing about houses of worship is you're supposed to put that aside, whether it's in a synagogue or in a church. You go inside as a community, and as a practicing Catholic, it is every Sunday at Mass, we are reminded of Jesus' sacrifice for us. And we need to actually get off our phones, be together as people. And really, to quote Cardinal Dolan of New York, he said, we need to end the violence in our hearts. This is not going to be a simple thing where, you know, gun control is going to fix it. Because, I mean, in the UK, I mean, obviously it's very different. There have been stabbings and knife crimes. It's obviously not at the extent that we have acts of violence in the United States. We have to deal with something bigger here, which is building actually communities where we're talking to one another. And that's not an easy thing to do. I think it is incumbent upon families and communities to come together. It has to come across different religious denominations, Muslim, Jews, Christians, whatever you may be. But this has to stop. This shooter was making a political statement by doing this on the first day of school. We don't know his motive, but we know he was making a statement. He released a manifesto that was taken down. This is a man who was driven by hate, and he was making he cowardly took his own life, but he was making a statement by targeting children en masse. And it is unforgivable, but that ending that violence in our hearts, that is a huge national discussion. I hope our politicians are up for it. They're certainly not acting like it. And I think that, broadly speaking, we each as individuals and in our communities need to take some real steps to be more Christ-like, dare I say.
But Lana, isn't the difference between the US and other countries the ease with which people can access assault weapons? I mean, the police chief there said, Antonia, that these weapons were legally purchased, that this individual was able to buy these weapons and use them like this, and the US allows that, and it's come through Congress how many times, and it is members of the Republican Party who stop these laws being passed.
Yeah, that's true. And it's one of those things where the Second Amendment on the right to bear arms is something that is very deeply ingrained. I understand why people necessarily say, okay, well, we should take steps for gun control. I get it. I'm just not really sure it's going to solve the problem. And the other part of it, it is just a very deeply ingrained part of American culture and society. You can disagree with it. I just feel like we've had this conversation so many times about gun control, and the amount of weapons we already have in this country is so massive that at this point, if you were to stop the legal sale of firearms, is that going to do anything? I'm not sure. We will have this conversation again. But again, you've got two competing things here. Number one, this sort of tenet of our Constitution and the Second Amendment to bear arms, and this unfettered violence, which I think is broader than just guns. I do understand, yes, there is very easy access compared to, say, the UK and other countries around the world. I just am not sure there's going to be a big change there.
Okay, I just want to get a very brief response from Jolie. I can see you want to come in there.
Look, chomping at the bit on this, I mean, there are many things we can do as a country, and 90% of Americans support stronger gun safety. There are a variety of rules and laws that can be put in place to slow down the misuse of guns by violent people, people with mental illness. We just don't do it. We don't do those. We don't put in place those laws, and the excuse of the Second Amendment is used. Why is the Second Amendment more important than the lives of children praying at Mass? It's not. And we need to be real in this country. And unfortunately, the Republican Party has consistently blocked any common sense gun safety measures historically, and then says, well, we don't know if they'll work. We never try. We need to try, and we haven't tried enough.
Okay, I just want to go back over to Minneapolis now, because we're joined live by CBS News correspondent Lana Zak, who has been monitoring all of the day's events on the ground there. Lana, what can you tell us? What's the latest that we know right now?
Hello there, Katrina. It is a heavy day here, and we heard emotional remarks from Mayor Frey, who spoke about saying that this is a day that we need to be done talking and that there needs to be action. He said that we should be operating from a place of love for our kids, which goes to some of what you were discussing there. We have some positive updates amid all of this devastation. We did learn at this press conference that was just happening here that all of the children, there were 14 children who were transported to the hospital. They are now expected to survive. They have various levels of injuries. Of course, we do know that there were 2 young children who didn't make it, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. They were in those pews for morning mass when the shooter opened fire. And we also learned a new detail that just, there was something about it that you can imagine that just hurts your heart, that some of the students had sat down in the pews and others were still making their way in. And this was on only the 3rd day of school for these students. They range in age from pre-K to 8th graders. And it was in these beginning moments of prayer that the shooter opened fire through those stained glass windows, eventually turning the weapon on themselves and taking their own life. But for the families, for the community here, just so much devastation, such heavy hearts. And we heard that especially from the principal of the school, who opened by just saying to all of the families, to all of the students, how much they are loved.
And Lana, just when you're talking about the community there, we heard from Chief O'Hara say, unfortunately, our community has been dealing with these sort of incidents for some time now. It's not new here. How does the community move on from this? What happens now? Such grief, such heartbreak.
Well, Katrina, I've covered many of these types of school shootings and church shootings, and unfortunately, each one of them is unique in the lives that were lost, but there is that commonality of grief. And we heard that from the people who were assembled here today, saying that even after this is no longer the most prominent headline, this will still be the most prominent thing for those parents, who will have to now live their lives without their children. There's no moving on from that.
And that call from Principal DeVore asking people to say never again.
Right. And we heard that from the elected leaders, from Governor Walz. Of course, we did hear that President Trump had reached out and offered any support that Minneapolis needs, that Minnesota needs in this tragedy. But it is a moment where we have seen before where some will say there needs to be stricter regulations, something needs to change. We heard that from the speakers saying action needs to happen. Minnesota has a Democratic governor. The electorate here is largely Democratic leaning, blue leaning. They are more supportive of gun control restrictions. That doesn't necessarily match up with the current administration. But what we have also seen here in the United States is that more and more these types of actions that are taken on gun control and legislation are taken at the local and state level, because there is very little agreement that can be had on the national stage, unfortunately, Katrina.
Indeed, as we've been just discussing. CBS News correspondent Lana Zak, thank you very much for joining us live from Minneapolis.
Just to recap on what we were hearing then from that news conference that we were just watching a few minutes ago, 2 children aged 8 and 10 killed and 17 other people injured, including 3 adults, 14 children in that school shooting in Minneapolis. It happened during morning mass at Annunciation Catholic School. The suspect, we now know, was armed with a rifle, shotgun and a pistol and shot through the church windows and then died of self-inflicted gunshot injuries. A coward, said the local police chief, Brian O'Hara. And we were hearing there from the mayor of Minneapolis talking about gun control, saying that the country's leaders have to do a whole lot more. There are more guns in this country, he said, than we have people. This is on all of us. So a day of huge grief and pain there in Minneapolis.
Indeed. Well, we will be talking about many other events and keeping an eye on the latest from Minneapolis. So do stay with us here on BBC. Hello and welcome back to The Context USA with me, Katrina Perry, in Washington.
And me, Ben Brown, here in London.
Well, Tony Blair is taking part in a meeting chaired by Donald Trump on plans for a post-war Gaza, but there is no Palestinian official at those talks. Now to New York, where we're seeing second quarter results for the biggest company in the world by market valuation, Nvidia, a bellwether for the whole of the tech sector.
Yeah, it is the firm that has grown at breakneck speed, and it's now worth some $4 trillion thanks to surging demand for its chips and the rapid advance of artificial intelligence. Nvidia makes the graphic processing units that power AI.
Now, because it is so big, the results have a huge impact on the stock market. And they also show really just where we're at with the AI boom. Are the companies behind it part of an overhyped, overvalued bubble or something more?
And those results will also tell us something about Donald Trump's shifting trade policies and shifting policies on tariffs. Earlier this year, he cracked down on Nvidia's sales to China before then restoring its access to the Chinese market. So let's get more then from our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury, who's been going through those company results for us. What do they tell us and how significant do you think they are?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can't be understated, as you point out. AI And the kind of innovations there are kind of considered amongst some of the most important in human history. And the company at the center of it is NVIDIA, which is why people are kind of poring over their numbers. At the moment, we're seeing revenue of around $46.7 billion. That's up 6% from the previous quarter. The key number that people were looking at had to do with data center revenue. In other words, they sell a lot of their chips to these hyperscalers, companies like Microsoft, Google, Facebook, that are kind of racing to build these huge data centers. And these chips are sort of what are kind of inside those giant kind of rectangle boxes that are popping up in many parts of the globe. And there the revenue came in at $41.1 billion, up 5% from the previous quarter, roughly in line with what people were expecting. I guess the headline news, if you like, is that when it comes to the H20 sales, these are chips that Donald Trump has allowed of kind of chips made by NVIDIA to China. Well, there it basically says there were no H20 sales to China in the second quarter. And going forward in the third quarter, they released kind of what they think they will make in the next quarter in terms of revenues. And that figure also did not take into account future sales from China. And as a result of that, the share price has fallen around about 2%, 2.5% at the moment. That sort of geopolitics playing into the results from this chip giant.
And when you say giant, I mean, it really is a giant. As I mentioned at the beginning, its market valuation is astonishing, isn't it? I mean, $4 trillion.
Yeah, you know, and look, it's no accident that when we talk about kind of the transformative nature of AI, this is seen as the company that is the backbone to much of that. And you can't underscore the importance of it. And I think that is why it has this massive valuation. The tech stocks have, because of that anticipation of the sort of growth it will unleash in the future and its potential, have really been driving US stock markets higher in recent months, despite concerns about Donald Trump's trade policies, despite higher tariffs, despite, you know, at times lower jobs reports coming out from America or signs of potential inflation creeping up. All of that is dismissed because the stock market is being pulled higher, not just by NVIDIA, but also those hyperscalers I mentioned, companies like Microsoft and Facebook. And investors have begun to question whether or not they're actually going to, these bets that these companies are making will actually pay off. And that was sort of part of the significance of why Wall Street is so obsessed right now with NVIDIA's results.
OK, Michelle, thank you very much indeed. Michelle Fleury there, our North America business correspondent.
Well, our panel is back with us. Antonia Ferrier, she's former staff director for Senate Republican Communications and former senior strategist for Mitch McConnell, and Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama. Just interested to get both of your thoughts on this. Joel, to you first. NVIDIA is a really interesting example of how President Trump's policies can impact on a single company and the wider economy, and how their policies can impact back on President Trump's policies.
You bet. Look, Katrina, we're talking about a situation where NVIDIA now is paying the United States government. I believe it's 15% a share is what we're taking. We just took 10% of Intel as well, another major chip maker. And so there's sort of a socialist dynamic underway in this Trump White House when it comes to American business and corporations, not to helping the American public in terms of health care, for example, and supporting education or closing the education department, for example, but really in terms of corporate welfare. And my fear is that, as was just discussed, this scenario of too big to fail may soon arrive. And the United States government will be on the hook for that if there is a bubble and then that bubble bursts. And so it's a very high-risk strategy. I don't know why we're not letting the free market work in these technologies, and why the United States taxpayer is footing a major bill for the innovation of the future.
Antonia, what's your response to that? Because these policies are quite different to the traditional policies of a Republican Party.
Yeah, well, I feel like I agree with Joel there. I call me so old school that maybe I'm new school again. But yeah, I remember not too long ago when Republicans were beating the tar out of Democrats for being statists. So no, I'm not comfortable with this. I know there are a lot of Republicans and conservatives who are not comfortable with this. This is the full horseshoe in effect when Bernie Sanders is praising President Trump for his actions on Intel. I'm in an uncomfortable place. So I'd like to get back to the old school Republican Party saying we shouldn't be taking stakes in companies, and so I can get back to criticizing Joel for his party doing that. But on a serious note, we're not in a place. I think I have some concerns about NVIDIA. Look, I'm not a Wall Street analyst, but there has been enough that I've read in the paper where you do start to wonder with these companies, the Magnificent Seven, and how large they are, that is there going to be a bubble? And more importantly, I think most people in the United States around the world are not working for these big tech companies. They are mom and pop shop, small businesses across the country. And I'd like to actually see some policies come out of Washington that supports them and make some common sense. I don't think the tariffs are very smart. It's an import tax. And as an old school conservative, I don't like people telling me what car I should or shouldn't buy. So you can count me as more on the side of Joel than with Donald Trump and all of this.
Joel, can I ask
Unity.
you? I mean, we heard there Antonia talking about a bubble. Do you think, is it a bubble, or is AI and everything around it in terms of tech just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and these firms like NVIDIA just going to get richer and richer and richer? Well, at the risk of giving away my age, I do remember a time when we had a bubble burst in the tech sector back in 1999, 2000. And since then, we've only seen growth as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a sequence of bubble bursts and then growth as well. But look, to this key point, how much does this affect the real American economy? In fact, as Antonia is hinting at, a lot of Americans are probably going to lose their jobs. And that's the big concern about AI and the lack of a coherent national AI policy, which is that many workers in the United States within the next 5 to 10 years are going to find that their work, their expertise is superfluous and has been overtaken by AI. And so we're going to have this extraordinary gap only increasing in terms of wealth in the United States. And that to me is the big concern. So if we're going to take a stake from these companies, we really need to make sure that they're putting a significant amount of money into the American economy through providing taxes. There's a lot that is at play here, and we just don't have a strong national AI policy to protect the American people is what I fear most. And Antonia, that is the issue, isn't it? Jobs in the long term. And AI, artificial intelligence, may bring many revolutionary benefits in terms of healthcare and all sorts of other things, but it is in the end going to cost a huge number of jobs around the world, but in the United States as well.
I think that's certainly true. I mean, the downstream effects, there's going to be a lot of positive, right? I mean, I use AI dealing with my invoices or doing some basic research, but we're seeing its impact on children too, that they are struggling to do basic reading, writing, basic skills. So I think there is some downstream real negatives here that we need to work through. Now, having said that, I do think when it comes to a national policy on AI, look, we are clearly in an arms race against the Chinese in AI and in technology, and I appreciate that. And that is sort of dominating all these conversations with the Trump administration in active negotiations with China, with Beijing over trade. So there is this global competition. I do appreciate that. And, count me on the side of the United States vis-a-vis the Chinese on this. But I think that's only part of it, right? We have to look at the societal impact from childhood learning, what actual jobs are going to be and where we're going to go from here, because there is going to be a lot of dislocation here. And I think we've got to start preparing and having real conversations about that. And I'm not sure we're really there yet.
All right. Antonia and Jill, thank you so much. But do stay with us. There's plenty more to discuss here on The Context on BBC News.
You're watching The Context USA. Well, it feels like a dim and distant prospect, but when the war in Gaza finally ends, what will its future look like? Well, here in Washington, D.C. today, that's just what President Trump has been discussing. He's gathered a team of advisors to talk through various scenarios for a post-war Gaza. including in that meeting the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair.
But we understand no Palestinian officials at those talks. Back in February, you may remember, President Trump prompted international outcry when he announced his own vision for a post-war Gaza to be transformed, he said, into a kind of resort development that he called a Riviera of the Middle East. Here's a reminder of those controversial comments back then.
We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute, I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so this could be so magnificent. But more importantly than that is the people that have been absolutely destroyed that live there now can live in peace in a much better situation because they're living in hell.
So that was Donald Trump back in February talking about a magnificent Riviera of the Middle East to be created in Gaza. He said then it would be run by the United States, with many of its 2 million Palestinian residents to be relocated elsewhere in the Arab world.
Now, the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says a new plan for the future of Gaza is being discussed today in the hope that the fighting there could end soon. Alongside the president and his team and Tony Blair also was Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law and former Middle East advisor, whose public presence has been notably absent from this Trump administration. Of course, he had a very large role in the first Trump administration.
And also in Washington, D.C. today has been the Israeli Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar. He's been meeting the US Secretary of State and Acting National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio. Hasn't been confirmed if Gideon Saar is also at those post-Gaza talks, but post-Gaza war talks. But we do know, as I mentioned, there's been no Palestinian official at that meeting. Well, let's bring back in our panel, Antonia Ferrier and Joel Rubin. Joel, what do you make of these talks about a post-war Gaza? People like Tony Blair, there, Jared Kushner, do you think they're going to come up with a plan?
Well, you know, Ben, there's a lot of history here between those two men and the vision of Gaza. Tony Blair's been working on Gaza for a couple of decades. Jared Kushner was actually the person who most likely put the idea of Gaza on the Riviera into the head of Donald Trump. And so they're now seeing perhaps their time in the sun. But, you know, I get very nervous about these meetings at the White House now. We saw one a week or so ago with leaders from Europe regarding Russia and Ukraine, and that basically after that meeting everything fell flat and died. And I think that there's no substitute for real diplomacy, for working with the Palestinians, for working with the Israelis to end this war, get a ceasefire, get the hostages out, and work with them on a plan on the ground. This is has always been the hardest question, what to do afterwards. And so these summits to the side with external groups is sort of it's sort of like a distraction, quite frankly, from the real business of getting this war wound down and working with the parties to have a legitimate day after plan so there can be peace in the region.
Antonia, what do you make of it? It feels a bit colonial, doesn't it? A throwback to the days when, you know, people in faraway countries decided the future of other countries thousands of miles away.
It's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about it like that. But look, I don't have any easy answers here on this situation. If I did, I would be getting the Nobel Peace Prize myself. The reality is there's no easy answer to Gaza. I think the political actors on the Palestinian side are difficult. Like, the question is, okay, who is the political leadership of Gaza right now? The Israelis will not recognize Hamas, that's been in control of Gaza for, goodness, over 10 years now. Is it the Palestinian Authority, who's over in the West Bank? So I think the question is, who are we even talking about? But I think Joel's right. There has to be this, hostilities have to end. But in the meanwhile, there has to be real work done, not only just with the Palestinians, but with the greater Arab world. The Saudi Arabians are key to all of this. And one thing I will say about Jared Kushner is he does have quite a bit of credibility because of the Abrams Accords with Saudi Arabia. The ultimate goal was to try and bring a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So I hope this wasn't just perfunctory dog and pony show, but that there can be some real spade work done, diplomatic work done with some of our allies in the region to try and come up with a reasonable plan on the other side of hostilities that can bring some stability and relief to people who have just been suffering for too long.
Of course, in many ways,
Ben,
the sort of post-war... Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, Katrina. Yeah, no, I mean, my understanding from talking to folks in this space is that former Prime Minister Blair has been shopping around a plan for a number of months, trying to get his vision implanted, to Ben's point. And I agree completely with Antonia here that we need to see a ceasefire. We need to see real progress on the ground. There needs to be a Palestinian leadership that's accountable to its people. All of those practical, radical pragmatism, as a colleague here in Washington, the Atlantic Council says, a leading Gazan voice. Radical pragmatism is what we need, not some of these great grandiose visions. Let's get brass tacks. There's enough money in the region to support it. That's what should be happening right now.
But to get to that post-war plan, there has to be a ceasefire first. I mean, there was a meeting of the UN Security Council today, and all 14 members, with one exception, passed a joint statement calling for an immediate ceasefire, an end to hostilities, a surge of aid, freeing the hostages. The one member who didn't agree with that joint statement was the United States. Is it time for the US to apply the pressure, use the leverage it has with Israel to try and force that ceasefire and then have those post-war talks?
Yeah, you know, Katrina, if you look at Israel itself, they're in that place in terms of the population. Poll after poll shows about 70% of Israelis want a ceasefire. Several 100,000 Israelis have been protesting in the streets in recent weeks, calling for that to get the hostages out. There is political support there. The problem is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has within his coalition a very narrow right-wing component that holds sway over whether or not his government exists or collapses. That's the challenge. And so, yes, for the United States, we could be pushing further, but we also need to remind this Prime Minister and this government that they are losing the Israeli people themselves too, that there is a desire to not have continual, perpetual war amongst the Israeli population. That's key. That's where the United States is a friend of Israel. We should be putting our fingers onto the scale. I don't think, I'll add last thing, I don't believe United Nations resolutions are going to convince anybody in Israel or the United States about how to end this war. It's going to really come from friends here in the United States talking to the Israeli government and reminding them that they are losing the Israeli people right now.
But there is that pressure that successive administrations haven't used briefly. Joe?
There's degrees of pressure. There's a debate clearly amongst Democrats about what to do related to military aid to Israel. That's a debate because it's not going to happen. It's not going to move into the legal sphere. But the pressure, even President Biden, he would tap the brakes on Israel. He would do it privately. And many of the actions that we are not seeing the Israeli government take today that they did take during President Biden's term were because of private pressure.
Okay. All right. Jill Rubin.